Happy Monday. Welcome back to Bible Study with Hans and Dan. We haven't done this since June. We're trying to remember how to do it, but we're glad you're with us. We'll be doing this every Monday and Wednesday through the fall, and glad you can join us, Facebook, YouTube. As always, we want to know what we can do better. What would you like us to do differently? Give us some feedback in the comments section, and one of these days we might figure out how to do a live studio audience for this. But
maybe.
Glad you're here. Tell us about that button that they probably can't zoom in on and see.
Maybe you can see this, maybe you can't. But today started National Assisted Living Day, and so they were giving all of the staff buttons out at the Culpeper for the assisted care.
All right.
And so we're celebrating.
Good.
Yes.
Hey, a really busy week in the life of our church. Unusually busy this week, but in a good way. The sharing closet, thank you for bringing donations yesterday. Yes. People are bringing them tonight as well. We've got the sharing closet at the church in the courtyard this Saturday from 9 to noon, going on simultaneously with the farmers market. And we were glad the farmers market was willing to work alongside with us for that. So that's just a good way for us to bless our community. If you still want to get a donation in, call the church office. We might be able to help you. And then right now across our building, we have Grief Share happening. Bible Study Fellowship, the men's group starts back tonight. They haven't been here in a year and a half. So the men's group starts tonight at 6:30, and the women's group starts Wednesday afternoon at 1. Great opportunity to connect with a lot of folks in the larger community. They're doing a Bible study off Matthew. With Bible Study Fellowship this fall, and talking about that kingdom. So really like that. So encourage you to check them out. And then our young adult group is starting 2 small groups tonight.
That's right.
So a lot happening here tonight. We're glad you joined us for Bible study.
What a great time to be a part of Culpeper Baptist.
It is. There are ways for you to connect. Please take advantage of them. All right, so Hans and I are always trying to figure out which we should do for these Bible studies, and we really like old books. Yes. And for Bible school at the Culpeper this summer, you found us an old book that we enjoyed using, an old lesson manual. So I've got, and you won't be able to see this, this is the Broadman Comments from 1958. And this would have been the Sunday school lesson manual for teachers in 1958. And I love this. The new co-author, Duke McCall, who was the president of Southern Seminary. So that's all fun and games. So we like going back and kind of thinking about how people were perceiving faith and the church during a different period, and kind of talking about it today. So let's kind of go back to 1958, if you will. Some of you are going to go back. Some of you have never been there. But let's talk about what was happening in 1958, because it was really good.
Yes.
So in the 1950s, the growth of Southern Baptists was through the roof. Everybody was growing. 1 million more in 54 was one of our things. 1 million people enrolled in Sunday school in addition in 1 year. So all kinds of growth happening in the post-World War II era. Culpeper Baptist Church was in the thick of that. 2 of the 3 buildings we own were built, one in 1954 and one in 1961. So, we built the 2 largest church buildings in our county within 7 years of each other. We were doing really well. And I would say that was the culmination of a great 30-year run for Culpeper Baptist. You think about in 1933, we built that educational building on Davis Street, right in the middle of the Depression. In the 40s, we started both the Child Development Center and what is now called the Culpeper. The late 40s. Yeah, go ahead.
And in the 50s, they were building in Culpeper.
Yeah, they were building
the Baptist home. I mean, they were building those buildings that we just took down.
Right. So we started the Child Development Center, the Culpeper, and in the late 40s, early 50s, we started planning to come here of people who had just built a building in 33. So 15, 16, 17 years earlier are saying, hey, we've got to grow, we've got to move. And we moved to West Street in 1954 with the addition of the first building, which we now call our education building. You just think about a 30-year period from 1933 to 1961 where this church kind of did everything right.
Lots of vision and lots of commitment.
Right. And And so we don't want to just go to the good old days, but we want to kind of the study we're going to do is kind of what the New Testament tells us about the church. And we wanted to use this 1958 model because it's a different tune than the one we sang today. You and I have grown up in an era where every denominational meeting was the church is in decline, and that's not what this is. So we wanted to kind of go back and do that. And as we talk about replanting this church, 247 years old, post-pandemic, or hopefully getting to be post-pandemic soon, what does it mean to kind of replant again? And so we wanted to kind of use these Bible studies to kind of talk about what we're doing. We also use these Bible studies just to kind of catch you up on what's happening in the life of the church. We try to do that in the first 3 or 4 minutes, a little bit longer today. And so if you don't do anything else but listen to the first 3 and 4 minutes, that's good because we need you to engage with what we're doing. All right, so we're going to start with the church's foundation, Matthew 16, beginning with verse 13. And Will's going to put that up on the screen. He's on the other side of the table for us today. Let me read that. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." All right, so there's a lot of thoughts. There were a lot of thoughts then and this day, and there's been a lot of thoughts since about this passage and what is the church's foundation. And there's been a lot of thoughts about who Jesus is, right? And there's still a lot of thoughts about who Jesus is. And Jesus, like he does with all of us, wanted to know what his disciples believed. He wasn't that interested in what the crowd believed. He wanted to know what his disciples believed. And he asked Peter a direct question, the same question I think he asked all of us. Who do we say that he is? And Peter gets it right. You are the Christ. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And that's the confession of faith. And Peter gives that to us. And Jesus does something really helpful for Peter, and something I think really helpful for us. He reminds Peter that Peter didn't come up with this on his own. It was revealed to him by his Father. And sometimes our witness is not attractive because it can come off like we figured this out on our own. Like we just have some special knowledge that this person does not have. And I think every time we say that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, we need to remind ourselves, I didn't get there on my own. God brought me to that moment. And so there's the confession of faith that is so central to the New Testament. And, you know, I always kind of default to Mark's gospel. Mark almost writes his gospel. So the mountain he's climbing is met at Peter's confession of faith. And then, that's the central moment for Mark's gospel. And I think Matthew's not too far off. And then Matthew gives us two references. Well, there's 2 references to the church in the gospel. Matthew gives us one. And so I think it's important that, hey, we got it here. What does it mean? And so we like to think about the church local and the church universal. The local church is this thing. It's an organization in a specific place. It's Culpeper Baptist Church. What's interesting is, again, 1958, is the writers are more expressive about what that looks like, right? And you got to remember in 1958, it mattered that we were Baptist.
That's right.
And it mattered that others were Methodist and Presbyterians, and there were very distinct lines.
And it was a good thing back then that we were Baptist.
And it was good traditions. And so they're very emphatic about what a local church looks like. Now, the universal church is the church throughout the world. And I believe it's also the church throughout time. It's the bigger church that we're a part of. And we've always struggled with this one, right? And you've been on the mission field, and you know this struggle much more than I do. So it's Well, is that a church?
Right. And does it have the same label as our
Right.
church? And if it doesn't, how do we qualify that in with who we are?
Right.
And we really do struggle with that. And we don't just struggle with that. They struggle with that there
Right.
too.
Right.
Yes.
So, when we start talking about the universal church, we start getting really nervous around doctrine and creed and who's in charge and local control and all those kind of
And
things.
when you throw the time in,
Right.
it really messes us up.
Right. And Baptists have historically been really local church oriented. So I continue to do some reading from time to time on religious liberty, and I'm in a book right now. And the great central theme of religious liberty for Baptists, and then the really hard work of trying to get all the Baptists to agree to work towards that, because we are so local church oriented. And so Baptist churches typically say it is a gathering of baptized believers. And that would be true of the universal church, right? A gathering of baptized believers. But we need to kind of hold that intention
Yes.
to the church everywhere. In the local church. And sometimes we get so focused on the local church opportunities or challenges. So if it's 1958 and we're at Culpeper Baptist Church and we're building buildings right and left and starting organizations and making a huge impact on our community, you're thinking, why isn't everybody doing this?
Right.
Why can't this happen in other parts of the world?
And we've said that.
Right.
We have said that. To
And
other
so we need to have a healthy tension between what God is doing in the local church that we would call Culpeper Baptist and what's God doing in the overall church. And so, again, Baptists have been a little reluctant sometimes to engage that universal church conversation, with the exception of missions. Like missions was our play to the universal church. And I think as we start talking about replanting the church, this isn't the first time anybody's ever had to do this, right? No. So what can we learn from the universal church in places where there has been great strife or war or conflict that has decimated the church for 10 years, 5 years, a year, and then they had to kind of restart? And what can we learn from them as we do this replanting now? And then verse 18, I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So there's a bit of conversation between us and our Roman Catholic friends about what this verse means. And we could fill up this room
Oh, my goodness.
with the scholarly articles and research that has been written on that. Our Roman Catholic friends believe this statement was about Peter. And that's why they have the successions of Pope that go to Peter. Some Protestant scholars believe that the foundation of the church is actually Peter's confession, which is typically where Baptists would lean. It's the confession of faith that is the foundation of the church. Some have also tried to find the route that Peter is a little rock, right? And we are all living stones making up this kind of church, and that Peter was a prominent leader in the early church. So
He was.
Yeah, if you are a Protestant and you still want a little hierarchy, right?
Right.
You need Peter to be something, right? Yeah.
He's got to hold a spot.
Right. That confession gets you a little nervous because that doesn't tell you who's in charge.
Right.
So some of our Protestant friends and our Baptist friends try to find a place for Peter that's not taking them to our Roman Catholic friends, but is somewhere back. So if I fully confused you in that, which I probably did, I can give you 100 books you can read on that. I believe that the confession, the foundation of the church, the rock of which Jesus is speaking on, is the confession of faith. That is what we have to build the church on. The confession of faith that Jesus Christ is Lord, that is revealed to us by our Father. That's what we have.
And that's universal.
Right. And so I think we need to be challenged by this because we get so captured by personalities in our day. And believe me, Hans and I are very much aware that there are a lot of YouTube videos you could be watching right now that will do Bible study with you. We get captured by the personalities, and we build churches on personalities and not on a confession of faith. And I think we just got to be careful about that. All right, Take us a little further.
And the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So Hades was thought of as the place of the dead.
Right.
And that was a pretty accepted thought or idea then. That was a very accepted thought in 1958.
Right.
And today there is a
Right.
place of the dead, and it's not just the cemetery.
Right.
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 And so then if Jesus has the power to overcome death, then death doesn't have any authority or power over the church.
Right.
That was pretty big.
Right. Right.
That changed a
Yeah.
lot of things.
Well, that allows you to be a martyr. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you take that fear away, which Jesus does, then you can do everything.
And it allows you to be able to live a life even as a slave or a
Right.
servant or whatever, poor person or whatever you may be, with hope.
Right.
Not
Right.
just,
Right.
this is all I'll ever be.
Right. The book that I just mentioned I'm reading right now about religious liberty is primarily around African Americans and religious liberty in Virginia. It's a fascinating book, and it's that story of what do you do when you're a slave?
Right.
And sometimes your circumstance, you got to look beyond that. And
Hope is a powerful,
Right.
powerful thing.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that we see here, and that's one of the things that they pull out.
Right.
That hope is so powerful, and there is a hope beyond that death. And the keys to the kingdom.
yeah, we've talked about this a few times.
How many times have you seen the politician, the political, whoever it was, get the keys
Yeah,
to the
to
city?
the city, yeah.
And so where does that come from? The keys to the kingdom here.
Right.
And so to give the keys meant to give authority. That was
Right.
something in that day that really meant something.
Yeah.
That wasn't a light thing for those keys to be handed out like it is today when it's just a public scene.
Right.
Being able to get the keys meant I have some sort of authority somewhere. And so for Jesus to say, he's giving authority to the kingdom,
Yeah.
that didn't sound right.
Right.
And so I'm sure Peter really got excited as the disciples heard this. Keys are an image of stewardship, though, also. So it's not just a matter of the fact of having the authority. When the master says, here, I want you to have the keys to the house,
Yeah.
that means I want you to take care of it.
Yeah, and so often we're happy to take the privilege without the responsibility.
Right.
And that's one of the challenges of church life in America right now. We
Very
all want a
much
little
so.
privilege without a lot of responsibility.
Yes.
And there is a stewardship of the kingdom that we're responsible for.
That's
and
right.
we'll talk a lot more about that in the
And
coming
we're
weeks.
going to answer for that
Right.
at some
Right.
point. And authority to bind and loose in Matthew's gospel appears to be focused on how we interpret commands.
Yeah.
It's not unique to Peter. You think of Jesus sending out the disciples
Right.
to go and do. He gives them that authority. And so they practice some of that.
Right. And, we've done a lot of Paul in our Bible studies, and Paul's often in this spot where he's trying to help interpret Old Testament law and
Right.
commands based on the person of Jesus Christ. And that's what Jesus is saying. Hey, there is somebody that's going to have responsibility for this.
Right.
And there's a stewardship responsibility of that as well. You and me and people like us are asked pretty often, how do we apply that to today? And you do that by staying connected to God and Christ, by understanding a kingdom responsibility. So Matthew kind of gives us that overview of that.
And so often you and I run into that position where we're talking to somebody that's a church person that really doesn't do a whole lot of their own study. And so what
Right.
we have said from the pulpit, that's it for them.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. All right, here are our closing questions. Who do you say Jesus is? Because again, that's where it all comes down to. And then our second question is, what is the church?
Right.
What is this church? If we're built on the confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, what is this church? So spend some time on that. We'd love to hear from you. Text, email,
Yes.
post in the comments section, and we'll engage with you some more. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll let Hans close us in prayer.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for Peter's confession. We thank you, O Lord, that it is your church, and we thank you that we're a part of it. And we ask, Lord, that you lead us and guide us as we have to give an accountability to what we have done or not done. And we ask, Lord, that you would give us that presence of mind to keep that before us at all times, following you closely. This we ask in your name, and your will be done. Amen.
See you Wednesday night.